Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Yesterday, Rahul Gandhi's roadshow attracted sizable crowds and clearly cheered up the Congress party. But can Mr. Gandhi revive Congress fortunes? Or is that not just unlikely, but perhaps impossible? That's the discussion in part 2. But first, the Obama visit. Few would deny it was historic, but now that it's over, it's time to assess its outcome with careful analysis and precision. What sort of breakthrough have the two countries achieved on the nuclear front? With their policies and interests converging, is Indian foreign policy heading in a new direction? And finally, what message did the American president send with his final town hall speech? With me to answer those critical questions is one of India's most highly regarded former foreign secretaries and one of the architects of the Indo-US nuclear deal, Shyam Saran. Shyam Saran, let's start with the way the nuclear liability issues connected with the Indo-US nuclear deal have been handled. Is this a breakthrough understanding, as President Obama called it, or is it really just an attempt to kick the problem into the long grass?
No, I don't think it is kicking the can down the road. I think one should accept that if the two leaders themselves, who are the principals, are saying that this particular logjam has been overcome, I imagine it has been overcome.
So you take their word for it?
Yes, I would.
Let's then first focus on American concerns to do with Section 46, which permits tort claims against the supplier. Now, these are to be resolved by way of an assurance to be given by the Attorney General of India as a sort of memorandum. Can that really take precedence over a law passed by Parliament?
Well, that remains to be seen, because we are really speculating about what could happen in the future. But I would say that the article itself clearly says that it is the operator who would be liable. So in that sense, there is no liability, extra liability on the supplier. But of course, one could argue.
Can I interrupt there? What the article says is, nothing contained herein shall exempt the operator. It doesn't actually say anything about the supplier.
It doesn't say anything about the supplier, but the law is very clear that it is the operator who is the target as far as this particular
except for the fact that the supplier companies in America are worried that they could be included, and clearly the Indian government recognizes that concern.
They may have a concern about that, but that is the sort of concern which will have to be spelled out, as was pointed out, within the ambit of Indian law. So it is quite clear that the Indian law is not going to be changed.
That's the point I'm asking. Can then an assurance by way of a memorandum issued by the Indian Attorney General take precedence over Indian law?
It depends upon whether or not the courts in India uphold that.
Which means that in fact this issue will be potentially liable to a challenge in the courts.
It is possible that it would be challenged. You cannot guarantee that it will not be challenged in court. But what I'm saying is that the kind of deal which has been worked out, to my mind, substantially addresses the concerns that the suppliers have.
Let me put it like this. If there's a possibility it could be challenged, and at the end of the day, any victim of an accident has the potential to challenge it if he or she wants. And if there's then a possibility it could be struck down, that means there is an uncertainty that looms in this area.
There is an uncertainty which looms in this area, but as far as the supplier is concerned, the particular article that you are mentioning does not directly impinge on the interests of the supplier. Secondly, there is, as you know, also an insurance pool which has been worked out.
Let's come to the insurance pool. Let's come to the insurance pool later. Let's stick to Section 46 first. You're right in saying that Section 46 doesn't name the supplier. The big question is, does it exclude the supplier? And that needs to be settled in a court of law. The second thing that needs to be settled in a court of law is whether an assurance given by the Attorney General can take precedence over a law passed by Parliament. Those two uncertainties loom, as you agreed. In those circumstances where that uncertainty and therefore that danger looms, will an American nuclear supplier want to invest in nuclear plants in India?
That is left to the American company to determine, as has been pointed out by, I think, both Indian commentators as well as the Americans. What I think is important to recognize here is that an effort has been made by both sides to try and minimize the risk involved in investing in the nuclear sector in India.
There's a very interesting corollary to what you're saying. And I want to quote the United States Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes, who's clearly said, hereafter, it is for US supplier firms to assess the Indian market and take a call. And then the US Ambassador, Richard Verma, has said it's up to the companies what to do. Doesn't that suggest that the two governments have shifted the problem from the government to government level? It's no longer on their agenda. It's now a problem for companies to sort out.
I think what is very important to recognize here is that two governments have taken actions which enable now the companies to actually invest. Whether or not they actually do invest is a separate issue. Even if there was no liability law, companies would determine whether or not they want to invest in this sector based on the economic viability and commercial viability of the project.
Absolutely, yeah. But in addition to investing in terms of economic viability of the project, the companies also have to now take a call on whether Section 46 has been effectively answered. That is a decision now, as Richard Verma says, is no longer between the two governments. It's one for companies to decide.
The governments are convinced that this has minimized the kind of concerns that the companies have.
So then you agree with my point. It's no longer a government-to-government problem. It's a problem for companies.
No, it's not a problem for companies.
It's an issue for companies to settle.
It is an issue that in any case would have had to be settled, whether or not this legal issue was there at all. What I'm saying is that as far as the two governments are concerned, and the kind of issue that it had become between the governments
is no longer
there.
So it's no longer an irritant and a problem between governments.
No, it is certainly not an irritant between the two governments, but also I would say they are convinced that through this particular agreement, they have created an enabling environment for companies to be able to invest.
It's another matter where the companies share that conviction.
That obviously is something that I cannot answer.
Let's then come to the way Section 17B has been tackled. The Indian government and 5 Indian insurance companies have jointly agreed to set up a 1,500 crore insurance pool to cover the question of suppliers' liability. But won't the cost of the premium add significantly to the cost of reactors, therefore making the reactors that much more expensive?
Even if we had the classic kind of a convention which was demanded by the IAEA, there would still have had to be a compensation that would have to be included in the legislation. And if that compensation figure had to be taken care of by insurance, then obviously the insurance premium would have to be in some way or the other added on to the tariff.
Now, if the insurance premium is added on to the cost of the reactor, that means clearly the cost of the electricity the reactor produces will go up.
Most certainly.
And therefore the cost for the consumer will go up as well.
Yes, most certainly.
Now, are we approaching a position where, because of all these compensation costs and safety costs and nuclear liability costs being added on, that perhaps American supplied nuclear reactors become economically unviable? Are we approaching that?
That is something that will have to be seen once the negotiations commercial negotiations actually start. In fact, again, I would say that even without this complication, thanks to what happened in Fukushima, costs of nuclear power plants have gone up, precisely because you have to add on far more safety features, security features than you did before.
My point is therefore this: if costs of nuclear plants are steadily going up, not just because of Fukushima, but because of our own liability requirements, at a time when there's a possibility that American shale oil technology could be available to us, at a time when solar power development is something both governments are interested in, then in comparison to the other two, is nuclear power losing some of its sheen and glamour?
If you take it in comparison, there is no doubt that the attractiveness of nuclear power compared to other sources of power seems to have diminished somewhat. But don't forget that nuclear power has one very great advantage even today, and which is it is a clean source of energy. At a time when there are very major concerns on climate change, on the issue of carbon emissions, here is a tested
solar
source
would be clean.
Well, problem with solar is that you don't have storage at the moment. Nuclear energy does not have that problem.
And that's an advantage that continues. In which case, let me ask you 2 more questions about the way in which the liability issues have been handled. If it were to emerge, and that I accept is a big if at the moment, that the way in which Section 46 has been resolved is not satisfactory to American suppliers, and at the moment the jury's out on that one, then will it mean that at some point, 2-3 years down the road, the government will have to amend the law?
No, I think the Prime Minister of India has been very clear in the media interaction that he had after the two principals met, that whatever solution has been found, that solution has been found within the ambit of the existing law.
That's a position he took and articulated today. What about something else?
He will be held to that particular statement 3 years down the line, 4 years or 5 years down the line, that you have very clearly committed yourself that I cannot change the law.
Is there a possibility that what in fact they discussed behind closed doors, the two heads of government, was that accept the solution at the moment to move this from our table at the government level and leave it as an issue for the companies to sort out? But 2 years down the road, when hopefully I have a majority in the Rajya Sabha, I might be in a position to amend the law itself.
Since I was not present at those discussions, I cannot say anything about that. But I would say it is highly unlikely that this kind of a sort of confidential understanding was arrived at.
Let me put this to them. What we've agreed upon is that the two governments believe they found a way of, from their point of view at any rate, effectively moving this from the government to government agenda. It's no longer an issue, it's no longer a thorn, it's no longer a problem at their level. Now if it's an issue, it's for the companies. Does that suggest that there's a very high level of trust between the two principals and a very high level of desire to push the Indo-US relationship to another level altogether?
Yeah. Let me point out to you that even in 2004, when we began the negotiations on the Indo-US Civil Nuclear Agreement, many people feel that this is what brought about a strategic partnership between the two countries. Actually, the nuclear deal was possible precisely because there was a kind of a strategic convergence between the two countries. So what you are seeing today, in my view, is that that particular strategic convergence, that big picture of India-US relations has now come back squarely on the table.
And in between it had sort of disappeared, now it's back.
Well, it had got sort of frayed at the edges and some tactical compulsions may have come in the way, but I think it is very clear today that that overall convergence between the two sides is certainly very much back in
But then would you not agree with what I'm saying? That given the way the two heads of government have sorted out the liability issue, and ensured that it's no longer an issue that rankles between the two governments. And now if it is an issue at all, it's an issue for American companies to face.
I think
that is proof of a high level of trust between them.
I think, you know, you are putting too much emphasis on just the agreement itself. What is very important is that throughout the negotiations on the nuclear deal itself, we came across very, very difficult problems, or sometimes almost insuperable problems. What enabled us to get over those problems was precisely because the principals, you know, put their own sort of commitment into getting over those.
And that's what happened this time round as well.
Absolutely. That is my sense.
In that context then, that this problem was sorted out this time round because the two principals actually got involved.
Yes.
Does that suggest that the two principals have developed not just a special relationship, but a high level of trust and a common desire to push the Indo-US relationship to another level altogether?
I'd endorse that.
Completely.
Yes.
In that context then, let's come to the strategic vision statement that they've issued for Asia Pacific as well as the Indian Ocean. Many other former foreign secretaries have publicly said they were surprised that a shared strategic statement has been issued, largely because they don't believe India and America have a shared strategic vision. How do you respond to that?
No, I cannot agree with that. I think it is very clear, both during this visit, but also 10 years ago, that the two countries, as I mentioned earlier, did have a strategic convergence. And that strategic convergence was based on a common understanding of the manner in which the global landscape was changing, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, and that the two countries working together had much more to gain than if they were working at cross.
All right, I accept that there has been for the last 10 years a strategic convergence between the two countries, but has that convergence become more dominant? Has it become more pronounced? Is it more agreed between the two now with Mr. Modi and Mr. Obama than it was, say, earlier?
What I feel is that while that strategic convergence was there already, in between, in fact, that particular convergence became somewhat blurred.
It's now back in focus.
My sense is that it is coming back into focus.
Now, that strategic vision statement for the Asia-Pacific and the Indian Ocean says that the two sides affirm the importance of safeguarding maritime security and ensuring freedom of navigation and overflight throughout the region, especially the South China Sea. Now, those last 5 words suggest that there's a significant convergence between Delhi and Washington, A, in terms of how they view China, and B, in terms of how they want to respond to China. Do you welcome that? Or are you a bit surprised by it?
No, I could welcome that. And by the way, this is not a new statement. If you look at the joint statement which was issued in September when Prime Minister Modi visited Washington, you will find similar language in the joint statement. If you look at the joint statement which was issued when the Prime Minister visited Tokyo, you find a similar...
What about a view expressed on our program yesterday by 2 of your predecessors, Kamal Sibal and Krishnan Srinivasan, both of whom said that this might be a mistake? Certainly one of them says this is something that disturbs him. A, because China is our principal trading partner. B, because we have a border problem with China. We're going to make that relationship much more complicated and difficult to handle because we're now seemingly aligning ourselves with America in terms of how we view China and in terms of how we respond to China. They thought, Krishna Srinivasan in particular, this was a terrible mistake.
I do not wish to controvert what my distinguished predecessors have been saying, but my own experience has been that if we have closer relationship with the United States of America, if we have closer relationship with countries like Japan, if we develop closer relationship with the ASEAN countries, I find that the Chinese are much more amenable, much more sensitive to our interests than if we were not.
So rather than put the Chinese back up, this might be a very effective way of making the Chinese more amenable.
In fact, the record shows that is the case. In fact, why isolate yourself?
In fact, we're talking about the extent of convergence that is emerging.
And by the way, also that we are not looking at a US-India military alliance of the nature that US has with Japan.
It's not just, and we're talking at the moment still about the level of convergence that is emerged between India and America. And it's not just convergence in terms of the Asia-Pacific, convergence in terms of how they approach and view and respond to China. It's also something that emerged when President Obama was speaking at the press conference, that in fact he thanked India for its stand on Iran's nuclear weapons program. Sorry, not weapons, Iran's nuclear program. And many were surprised because they weren't aware that there was a convergence there. And the question I want to ask you is this: does all of this suggest that there is a new direction to Indian foreign policy that we're beginning to see?
One, I'm not quite sure why people are surprised. I think what is surprising is that the United States of America has now recorded that convergence in words.
Which they didn't earlier.
Which they didn't, but I could not understand why not. After all, what was the difference between the United States and India on the Iran issue? India also said, like the United States, that we do not wish Iran to become a nuclear weapon state because of the impact that it would have on regional security, including our own security. But what did we say? We said this particular issue should be resolved through dialogue and not through armed confrontation or any hostile action. Since the time that the United States of America, along with the other members of the Security Council and Germany, has been engaged in a dialogue with Iran to try and sort out this issue, we have welcomed that dialogue. We have said this is something that is precisely in conformity with our own
So what you're
approach.
saying to me is actually these levels of convergence, not just in terms of China, not just in terms of the Asia-Pacific, but also Iran's nuclear program, were there and present for a while.
Yes. Yes.
America is beginning to acknowledge them. Earlier, America
certainly
didn't.
On the Iran issue, I think there was no reason for the United States or some American analysts to actually project the Iran issue as somehow a point of divergence between the two countries. I don't think there was a divergence.
So in fact, the change, if anything, is a change from the point of view of America acknowledging what earlier it didn't
I think
recognize?
the United States of America is acknowledging that on this particular issue, India and the United States are in fact on the same page.
Now, I noticed that the two other leaders with whom our Prime Minister has established a fairly strong personal bond or a fairly effective relationship are Shinzo Abe of Japan and Tony Abbott of Australia, and both of them are very close traditional allies of America. Do we have here the making of a special relationship between these four countries?
I would not want to go as far as suggesting that we are on the road to having some kind of a quadrilateral military alliance. But let me take you back to 2005-2006. At that time, after the tsunami, in fact, because these four countries cooperated very closely together in delivering assistance to those affected by the tsunami, it was recommended by the American side and very enthusiastically endorsed by the Japanese side that we should have some kind of a forum where the four countries, as four democracies, as four maritime powers, could exchange views amongst themselves about the security situation. We were hesitant to begin with, I admit.
No longer.
But we actually, even at that time, we decided to go ahead with it as long as it was not seen as directed against this or that country. And actually, a meeting amongst the secretaries was already held.
Can I put it like this? You're now saying to me that in many ways, whether it's the relationship and attitude to China, whether it's to do with Iran's nuclear program, whether it's to do with relations with Japan and Australia and the possibility of a quadrilateral relationship, in many ways, these are things that have been in the making for a while.
Absolutely.
But are we now walking down that road more determinately at a faster pace?
As I mentioned to you, that in the last several years, that kind of clarity which was there of what are the points of convergence between the two sides, how the two sides could work together, how could they work with other countries in the Asia-Pacific region, that clarity had diminished. What you are seeing now is that these particular elements of India's foreign policy are being pursued with far greater determination, far greater vigor, and with greater deal of coherence.
That determination, vigor, coherence is attributable to Prime Minister Modi.
That is quite apparent, isn't it?
Now, in his statement to the media on Sunday, Mr. Modi stressed in particular the importance of personal chemistry between leaders as a very effective tool of building the relationship between their countries. And there's no doubt that clearly he and Mr. Obama are not just friends, they seem to have a special relationship. Will that special relationship, that special bond, be the engine that propels Indo-US relations over the next 2 years?
Leaders have a very important role to play. But leaders, or relationship between leaders, cannot be a substitute for concrete, convergence in their strategies.
But given that that concrete convergence has been there for a year or two,
as long as that convergence is there, as long as there is a real basis for them acting together, having a good chemistry between leaders is an additionality. It is a bonus.
Is that one reason why Mr. Modi is pursuing the previous path laid down by earlier governments with greater determination, greater pace, greater clarity?
I think he accepts and recognizes that the basic direction that Indian foreign policy was taking over the last several years. After all, don't forget that he himself at the press meeting said that the nuclear deal was a centerpiece of the strategic relationship between the two countries.
Words that Dr. Manmohan Singh could have used.
Exactly. So I believe that he accepts that the general direction in which Indian foreign policy had been moving over the last 10 years was essentially in conformity with the pursuit of India's national interests, and that he has an opportunity today as the leader of a party which has absolute majority and as himself being a very strong leader.
To push it faster.
True.
To push it faster.
Yes, I accept that.
Now, in that context, how do you view the town hall speech President Obama delivered yesterday? And I want to quote to you what he said. He said, "Every person has the right to practice their faith as they choose." And then he added, "Nowhere is that more important than in India." Many believe that this was said directly with reference to the Love Jihad and Ghar Wapsi campaigns that have become so controversial in the last couple of months.
Well, I thought he said something from some Indian film, some dialogue from one of the...
No, this was not a dialogue from an Indian film. Let's not go down that road. It clearly
what
wasn't.
I'm saying is that this was a town hall meeting. I think there was a lot of humor in the interaction that we had with the students there, with the people who were gathered there. What he said in terms of, whether or not, India would survive if it had religious conflict, frankly speaking, any Indian.
Absolutely, but he's not any Indian. This is an American president.
This is an American.
And his exact words were, India will succeed so long as it's not splintered along lines of religious faith. Now, he was saying it just after a month has passed since the terrible controversy about conversions in December, concern in the Christian community about churches being attacked, concern in the Christian community about Christmas being redesignated as Good Governance Day, all of which you must be aware of because it was widely reported abroad. So I come back. Was this in some sense a message to Mr. Modi to say that your silence on these issues will endanger India's future?
No, I would not take it as an explicit kind of a message to Mr. Modi, but I think I do take it as a message to India. I think he has...
Why not to Mr. Modi?
Well, Mr. Modi is included in the message to India, but what I said before is that the message that he has given, frankly, I subscribe to that message entirely as an Indian.
You say it's not a specific message to Mr. Modi. I want to quote something else. He says he quoted Article 25 of the Constitution. He spelt it out and says that it guarantees the right to profess.
But he did not. Why did he not deliver?
Can I finish the question?
Why did he not deliver this message when he so many hours that he spent together?
Well, we
with
don't
Mr.
know
Modi.
what he said in private to Mr. Modi.
Well,
neither you nor I. But
so
let me come back to my question. The reason why I ask whether this is specifically for Mr. Modi rather than just generally for India is because after quoting Article 25 and spelling out that it includes the right to propagate, he added that it was the fundamental duty of governments to protect and guarantee this right. Now, surely when he uses that phraseology, the fundamental duty of governments, he's addressing Mr. Modi.
Well, I don't think that you can take the position that India has actually failed on this count during Mr. Modi's
Many people in India feel that Mr. Modi's silence was worrying.
I think it is very important that we keep reminding ourselves that this particular article and other articles in the Indian Constitution are extremely important for the well-being and welfare of India's citizens. And whatever Mr. Obama has said, I don't think any Indian can take exception to those remarks because They are very much in keeping with what most Indians in fact believe.
Many people believe that these remarks would be embarrassing to a government where the Prime Minister not only was silent about these issues and was criticized not just by the press and the opposition but by ordinary people for his silence, and also it would be embarrassing to a government that was actually talking about the need for a anti-conversion law. You don't believe that?
I think
you don't accept that?
No, I do not accept that because you can also draw attention to several statements made by himself arguing for precisely that in this diverse country we all have to learn to live together, we must respect each other. So that message has also come from Mr. Modi. So I don't think that one should be so sensitive about what Mr. Obama has said. As I keep repeating that this is something that no thinking Indian would actually take exception.
Did the town hall speech in any way take the shine off the visit?
I don't think so. I do not think so at all. I think he has had a very good visit and he ended up with a very, very positive and rather informal kind of interaction with ordinary people in India. This is something that he would not be able to do in many other countries.
Many of your predecessors said this was an ungracious thing to say. One other said that this was ill-advised. He probably didn't realize how feisty the Indian media is and he was creating a controversy when none needed to be made. Was he ill-advised in making these comments?
I have not seen Indian media reaction which has been very negative as far as this particular town hall meeting is concerned.
I think what they had in mind was this might embarrass Mr. Modi, someone who was personally so warm and gracious.
Mr. Modi and the government seem to be very excited about the success of the visit. I don't think any one of them has drawn attention to this as having taken the shine of the visit.
All right, Shyam Saran, let's leave it there. My thanks to you for coming to studio, and my thanks in particular for helping us to analytically and in somewhat more precise terms understand the outcome of this visit and the sense in which Mr. Modi is not changing direction but simply pursuing an older direction but at a faster pace and at a more determined pace.